Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We have Rob Capaldi and Chris Cooper here today conducting a webinar on the brand new Campbell Insta-Lock. If you have any questions during the webinar, please use the question feature, and we will go over all of your questions and comments during the wrap-up section at the end. So without further ado, we'll pass this over to Rob and Chris.
Good afternoon, everyone here in the East and in the Midwest, and good morning to those on the West Coast. Thanks for joining us again for yet another webinar in our Ideal Connections webinar series. As I'm sure you're very aware of, we are going to be speaking about the Insta-Lock couplings today. As a little bit of background, this is a coupling that's been around for a couple decades now. Actually, it was really a revolutionary design that Campbell came up with over 2 decades ago. And we've been going to market with Continental Conitech for the last few decades, and actually their prior names of Goodyear Engineered Products and Vayance as well. And it's really been a very productive and profitable product line for our 2 companies. But as some of the patents have expired, we decided to jointly go to market with this product now. So we've set that up, and I believe that there's a lot of opportunity for growth still out there in the marketplace for this coupling. Obviously, there's a lot of cam and groove out there with varying designs and performance. And Continental will continue to distribute and sell this as well. Campbell will actually, as part of the Ideal Trident Group, only be selling here in the United States. So for those of you that may have joined north of the border and our friends from Canada, you will be still purchasing that from Continental. We are very excited to continue to push this product out in the marketplace. It is actually an integral part of a hose system. And for those of you that might be a little unfamiliar with the terminology of a hose system as opposed to a hose assembly, basically we're talking about parts that are engineered and designed to go together and integrate as part of a system. So a hose assembly simply is 3 parts: fitting or coupling, an attachment, and the hose itself. Campbell Fittings actually controls 2 out of those 3 components, the fitting and coupling, as well as the attachment. The only unknown was the hose, and that's where the crimp specs come into play. I'm sure many of you, if not all of you on this call, are very familiar with Campbell's Crimpnology and our system of crimping hose in a repeatable fashion. But that is something that we take a lot of pride in, and we'll talk a little bit about those crimp specs and testing as we move forward. One of the things that we always try to highlight when we're doing some education is we talk about performance as opposed to quality. I think quality is one of those words that's a bit overused, and I think it's easy to just throw it around. Whereas performance actually has, quite a bit of weight behind it, because you actually have to prove out that performance. There's a lot of fitting and coupling manufacturers around the world, and I think most of us actually have performance ratings or pressure ratings or whatever you might want to call them. The biggest question becomes, is there anything to back that up? At Campbell and at Conitech, we do just exhaustive testing to prove out those numbers, because we want you to feel comfortable with those pressure ratings that we provide, and we're trying to arm you with really more ammunition to win that sales battle against your competition, and really to sway those end users in our direction. So lots of testing to back that up. We'll show you one of those today as well. But when we're talking about system performance, we're really talking about peace of mind. Like I said, a lot of varying degrees of performance and quality for those fittings and couplings that are out in the marketplace. That was the whole reason we came up with Crimpnology. We were looking for a higher level of performance and repeatable with those safety factors. So I'm going to introduce Chris Cooper here, who's been with Campbell Fittings for probably close to 10 years now. Chris, I actually didn't even check that one, but seems like it's been 2 or 3 decades from the amount of time we've spent together. Glad to have you with us today.
Yeah, it's been over 10 years, and it feels like a couple days. Not really.
Still having fun, right?
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. And so, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Insta-Lock and some of the features and the Crimpnology system. So let's start with the system is incredibly important. The system which we're talking about is the Crimpnology system, and that is the system of proven performance. So it has to do with the crimp spec. It's all about the crimp spec and how you get the crimp spec. And with that crimp spec, you have a rated performance. So it's safe and leak-free, and that's what we're all after when we're putting hoses together, I hope. So there's no more mix and match. Mixing and matching products, meaning a fitting from manufacturer A and a ferrule or sleeve from manufacturer B, and you put them together, and really one part doesn't know the other part, so you don't know the specifications. And coming up with a crimp spec that really gets to a level of performance that's safe and leak-free is very difficult. So no more mixing and matching. You're going to use Insta-Lock parts with the Campbell mating. That sounds like it's mix and match there, doesn't it? But the Insta-Lock parts, which are made by Campbell, and the Campbell sleeve and ferrule know each other, so to speak. So there is a crimp spec. It's a published crimp spec, and we'll go through how to look that up. And you become a technical resource for your customer when you're talking about putting hoses together with a system, with a Crimpnology system with a level of performance. You stand apart from your competition, because a lot of your competition is still putting together hoses that either eyeballing, squeezing something until, that looks good, stop there, and the rated performance is really unknown. And so that's what we want to get away from. So the Crimpnology assembly procedure, and this is not a Crimpnology webinar, so we're not going to get too deep into it. But the Crimpnology assembly procedure is, you'll notice on the left, we have the ferrule and sleeve selection and crimp specification guide. So that is a Campbell publication where all of the crimp specs are published, and they're published based on the hose wall, which is the center picture. So you have your ID, your OD, but really we're concerned with the hose wall. Why are we concerned with the hose wall? Well, these hoses, generally the industrial hose world, are made hand-built hoses. They're layers of material that are wrapped, and then reinforcement, a tube, then reinforcement, then cover. And in the course of manufacturing, the actual hose wall will vary considerably over the 400-foot length, say, on a mandrel. And so depending on where you cut it, your hose wall may vary quite a bit. And of course, the idea of the hose, even though it's perhaps a 2-inch hose, the ID from the manufacturing process could be slightly larger or slightly smaller than exactly 2.0 inches. So we use the hose wall because we know we want to compress that hose wall between the serrations on the stem and the sleeve or ferrule. And once it's been crimped, we know that compression factor, then we know the rating. So the procedure is measure the hose wall, use the chart. It's pretty simple. And then test. Campbell tests their hoses weekly. Anytime there's new hoses, or anytime one of our customers requests a particular hose with a particular fitting on it, if we don't already have the test, we perform those tests free of charge, because we look at it as one hand washing the other. If we know the performance of that particular hose with our fitting on it, it helps us verify the system and verify the crimp specs over and over again. And of course, it helps the distributor and our customer as well. So, and that's tested to beyond 4-to-1. So a 150-pound hose, we take it beyond that 600-pound until the hose blows with no leaking or failure at the fitting end. And that's how we know that it's safe and leak-free. So the assembly procedure, here's a little more in-depth, but again, a little broad brush, what to do. So you measure the hose wall thickness in 2 to 3 locations, and you take an average of those measurements. You use the chart, and it's an example of the chart on the right-hand side of the screen, and you'll see in that yellow highlighted area under the 2-inch column, that what we've used is a .297 hose wall, and we get a crimp diameter of 2.614. All right, I think that's what it says there. I'm getting old, my eyes are going. But anyway, so the homework, once you've crimped to that spec, you measure the final OD of the crimp, not on the ridges that are formed between the dies on the ferrule or the sleeve, but on the flat areas. And that crimp must be within 0.010 of an inch, plus or minus 0.010. That's the tolerance. And then your hose is complete. Once you're within that tolerance, the hose is complete. So as an example below in that box, we'll see if the spec was 2.575, you would have within 2.565 to 2.585 in order to be within our 0.010 tolerance. And with that, you have the 4-to-1 safety factor.
Chris, if I could just jump for a second.
Sure.
Before we do the poll, I think that, our entire hose industrial distribution world has gone through a lot of changes in the last decade or so. I mean, obviously, we were using a lot of preform clamps to put hose assemblies together. Then there was swedging or swaging that was happening, a little less precise. And then finally, we've moved on to the crimp technology, which is much more exacting that Chris just walked through. So, you were had an easier time of differentiating yourself when you were crimping hose assemblies and your competitor was just banding them. But now a lot of people are crimping hose assemblies. Not that there's anything wrong with banding, but when you're looking for, peace of mind and again, something that's going to stay together, a hose assembly, a hose system that's going to stand up to performance, especially when things go wrong, you do need that crimp for permanent attachment. But based on what Chris just walked through, the specs and the process that you use, do think about actually using that documentation and that process to sell. I think that a lot of times people forget that the fabrication part of it is truly a science. We've done a lot of the work on the back end, all those calculations and everything like that. But those of you that have either put together hoses or have other people putting the hoses together for you on a daily basis, it's not simple. It does take some expertise and, it's easy to learn, but it's also easy to take shortcuts and make mistakes. So that's why you have a process. So think about, talking to your customers, especially those, critical application ones, about why you have a process, what controls you have in place to follow that process, and really to verify it in the end. I think a lot of people are doing asset tracking, with things like Hose Tracker that Continental has available, and other databases. But, tagging those hoses, the born on date, what it was tested to, and then really, an accounting of all those pieces of the hose assembly and the specs that went along with it. So something to keep in mind to give yourself a little bit more of an edge over the competition. Back to you,
All right,
Chris.
Courtney, why don't we pop up that poll, Courtney? All right, so the poll is, let's see how we're doing there. Well, we got almost 50% people voted. So let's take a look at the answers here. We've got 47%, 50% at all of the above, 31% broken cam arms, and 19% fitting ejects from the hose. Well, we can move on now, Courtney. I think that's probably pretty good. 55% voted. And the answer is really all of the above. So let me get my screen to move forward. Okay. There we go. All right. So if we just take a quick moment on the poll, the decompression of the gasket, which really nobody put in there, and that's obviously unless the fitting ejects, that is the other leaking failure mainly. But that happens because of a broken arm or a bent pin that holds the arm. Most of the time, if it's an overpressurization of a cam lock, it'll eventually bend those pins, which then decompresses the gasket, and the entire system starts to leak, because the cam lock, although it's an easy fitting to use, it's a great fitting, it's fairly simple. And those cams, all they do is put some pressure on the gasket. And once that pressure is relieved, whether it's a broken cam arm or a bent pin, it starts to leak, and that's the end of the connection. So it is all of the above. So now if we take a look at the performance ratings for the Insta-Lock, you'll see that from sizes 1/2 through 2 inch, the max system working pressure is 250 PSI. And from 2 to 4 inches, or from 2.5 to 4 inches, it's 150 PSI. And the 5 and 6 inch versions are 75 PSI. Now remember that everything that Campbell does in terms of performance rating carries the 4-to-1 safety factor. So when we rate a 2 inch stainless steel Insta-Lock to 250 PSI, what we're saying is that attachment for a C or an E on the hose, that attachment will stay leak-free and not move through 1,000 PSI. That's the 4-to-1 safety factor. Now, obviously, we don't really want to tell our end users that, oh yeah, it's good to 1,000 PSI, because you know what happens out in the field. People go nuts and start cranking up the pressure. So it's 250 max working pressure with the 4-to-1 safety factor, which is very important to understand. And that's carried on all Campbell products, but the Insta-Lock included.
Chris, going to jump in one more time, because I think it's worth reiterating, for all the testing that we do and proving out stuff, it is certainly important to realize about that safety factor. But, one of the critical pieces that Chris just mentioned was that the fitting in conjunction with the attachment gives you the pressure rating. So a lot of manufacturers out there might just say, well, my 2-inch cam and groove is rated to 250 PSI. Okay, how are you attaching it? And there's no mention of that. So let's be frank. You could use a band clamp, you could use a bolt clamp. Well, maybe not a bolt clamp so much for the cam locks, but you could use a sleeve, you could use a ferrule. The reality is each one of those would have a different pressure rating. So you really have to pair the two together in order to get that pressure rating, and that's how we rate everything. Now that we are part of the Ideal Trident Group and we are actually manufacturing and selling clamps, we do need to be careful on how we actually assign these pressure ratings. So, bands work for specific applications, not necessarily a permanent attachment, but it all depends on what that stamped information is. But do be careful, because not all cam and groove is created equal, and that's basically why we're talking about Insta-Lock here today.
And so let's take a look at the proven performance. And when we say proven performance, what we mean is tested performance. Again, as I mentioned earlier, Campbell tests weekly. We have thousands and thousands of tests on file. Obviously, some of them are now older, so we continue to repeat tests as hoses are updated or new sizes, etc. So let's just take a quick look at this. Is a summary of a test we did. Every test we do is conducted to ASTM D380 standards, which basically says that, you run the water, it's obviously a hydrostatic test, that the water is at roughly 70 degrees. We try and keep it right at 70 degrees. And the water is run through the system so that all parts are at 70 degrees. So the water is run through for quite a bit of time until all parts measure at 70 degrees. The water is shut off. And then the pressure is raised slowly until there's a failure. And that failure could be, but very rarely is, anything happening with the fitting or the attachment. 99.9% of the time, the hose bursts beyond the 4-to-1 safety factor, which is really what we're looking for. So in this particular test, the hose is a 1¼ inch Goodyear frac blending hose, a 500 psi hose. So this is obviously a little bit of an older test with the Goodyear hose, but the coupling is a 1¼ inch 3/16 stainless steel Insta-Lock. And from the previous slide, we know that's rated to 250 psi. Now, just a little note here. When I looked at this slide and I said, wait a second, so we're putting a 250-pound fitting on a 500-pound hose. And in most cases, that would not be something you would necessarily want to do unless the customer you were doing it for was a very reliable and understanding customer. Because if you're not covering the ley line on the hose with your fitting, it can be a problem because the assumption in the field is, oh, it'll go to 500 psi because that's what it says on the hose. So that's just kind of a little note here with this particular test. So the highest pressure recorded, and you can see that in the top right picture, was 2,535 psi. Now remember, it's a 500-pound hose with a 250-pound connection. So the reality is that this system is only a 250-pound system. But we took it to failure, and the hose working pressure, obviously 500 psi. So the hose itself exceeded the 4-to-1 safety factor, actually went beyond 5-to-1 before the hose blew. And the coupling, if we look at the coupling and attachment, actually exceeded 10-to-1 and stayed on the hose leak-free to over 2,500 psi. Now, this is a little document that we will be sending you as a thank you for attending the webinar. And it's Insta-Lock differentiators. And really, it's the print on it is too small on your screen to read through it. We will go through in the next few slides the individual differentiators and attributes. But this is a great PDF. You can print it out. You can hand it out to your customers. This is something that really shows the intricacies of the design work that went on for this formerly patented product that really is the cat's meow of cam locks. So you'll get this as a thank you after the webinar. So let's take a look at the Insta-Lock features and benefits. Obviously, this is not a C or an E, so there's no shank on this one. We're really talking about the head of any of the fittings, any of the couplers. So you have patented automatic locking handles. And we'll go through that a little more in another slide. But so that ring is actually a spring. There are no springs in themselves. The ring itself is the spring. And as you push down on the handle, it snaps under those casting wings and self-locks. The damage-resistant coupler design, and you can see it's kind of a V in the casting on the sides. Now, you look at that and say, well, what does that do? Come on, man. Well, actually, what it does is it reinforces the sides of the cam lock. It gives it a little thicker material in that V area, and that helps to reduce egging. And egging is, you know, your customers out there dropping these cam locks on the pavement all over the place. And sure enough, over time, they will egg and then they will no longer connect. So that extra reinforcement on the side, the V reinforcement is also part of the patent, or was part of the patent, and that helps eliminate or reduce the egging. Then the dragability factor, you see those little wings. So as you're dragging the hose along, those wings stick out further than the handles. So actually dragging along the ground is not a problem. You don't have anything to really catch on anything that's potentially going to hold up the dragging process, so to speak. And the ergonomic handle, you can see it's really, we've got a depression in there, and it's a nice, easy grab from underneath. If anybody's ever used it, you'll know what I'm talking about. And so it's really something that that's quite easy to use. And of course, the damage-resistant pull ring. So again, the pull ring is the spring that locks, but you just reach in with your finger, pull it out, flip it up, and it's unlocked. And then the machined part C&E hose ends. So the serrations are machined They're very clean serrations, and so that gives you the holding power. When you crimp the Crimpnology specifications, you get the pressure rating with the 4-to-1 safety factor. And of course, the crimp-on hose end with an interlocking ferrule groove. So let's take a little closer look at the patented locking arms. So it's easy to engage and disengage. If you look at the pictures on the right, you'll see the red arrow on the far right picture, that is actually open. You can see the ring is on top of those cast wings that actually help with the dragability. And when you push it down, the ring itself pops over the edge of those castings, and you get locked and engaged, and that's the green arrow. You can see that the ring is now underneath those cast wings, and it is fully locked. So it's a very simple design versus the competition that has détente and little things to pull down and springs and an extra piece you have to put on the cam lock itself to get to engage and lock. So no springs, no rods, no cotter pins, etc. So it's very simple, bulletproof design, and works extremely well. And of course, it's been out there now for years and years, so it's a very, very much a proven design. And we do have repair kits, so you can get new arms. Let's face it, out in the real world, people are hitting stuff and banging stuff, and they will break things. And so you can get repair kits. Now, the patented hose stop. So you'll see that this is a C, and you see the little nub that the arrow is pointing to, and that is for the assembly procedure guys in the shop. When you cut your hose, rather than jam the hose completely up to the head of the C of the fitting itself, those hose stops stop the hose just short of it. Now, okay, so everybody's out there going, okay, cool, but what does that mean? Well, actually what it does is it gives, there's a little bit of separation between the end of the hose and the head of the fitting. So as you crimp, of course, you're compressing the hose wall, and the hose, as it compresses, needs to flow, and it flows both forwards and backwards. So it gives the hose a little space to flow forwards and not put pressure on the head of the fitting. So that's the patented hose stop feature. And of course, I don't have a picture of the interior of the C&E, but it has a tapered ID head-to-shank smooth flow design. So rather than have a ledge where the head of the fitting hits the shank, it's actually tapered for a more of a full flow design with less turbulence and less restriction. It meets the ASTM and military standards. And you'll notice the next arrow in the center where it says unique barb design versus competition. And of course, the competition that we're showing there in the center is a 2-bump smooth shank with 2 serrations, and that's really for banding only. But the serration design that you see on the shank pictured, you'll notice that it has, I can't count the serrations, but it has a whole bunch of small serrations, which do a tremendous job of sealing and retaining the fitting in the hose. And then it has 2 larger serrations, which really bite in and keep that hose and give it that extra holding power to get to the performance rating that we stand behind. And then the last thing is the unique solid dust plug design. This is another patent, actually. The dust plug, you can see the arrow is pointing to the end of the dust plug that goes into the fitting, and you'll see it's solid. Every other dust plug is actually hollow on that side. So what's the big deal there? Well, the big deal is if it's hollow on the inside, that means whatever was in the hose, or if there's any contamination in the dust plug itself, you just put it right back into the hose. So this solid design, you basically can wipe off the end of the plug, put it in the hose, and there's no contamination entering the hose, and there's no transfer material, whatever it was, coming through the hose that's actually collecting in the dust plug itself. So it's a pretty cool design. And the Insta-Lock also has an added safety benefit, of having built into every one of the C's and E's, or the C's, I'm sorry, no E's, is a lockout feature. It takes a standard Master Lock 7LJ, you can see it in the picture. So it goes right through those cast wings and absolutely locks out the ability to unlock the cam lock itself. So that's unique in the industry. You know, we all have seen things out in the field that are very dangerous, and so it's nice to have the option here to lock this one out. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Rob, and he'll take it from here.
One last point on that lockout tagout feature. I don't know how many of you follow OSHA or go on their website to look at accidents or issues in the industrial hose world. But they publish a top 10 list of violations, most common violations that occur in our world every year. And usually around number 5, but always on the list, is that lack of lockout, tag out. So do find those applications because they are out there, usually in the critical stainless steel chemical world, but they're certainly out there. And you know, a lot of people asking it, what's this extra hole here for? Well, I'm so glad you asked. Anyway, I think we touched on this a little bit already. The Insta-Lock does come in 3 different grades of metal: the aluminum, stainless steel, and brass, obviously all dependent upon your stamped information. The aluminum being probably the most popular one based on volume for, you know, most applications, but getting into some of the more critical ones of the chemical and sanitary and also the brass with some of those critical applications as well. So all those bases are covered here. The stainless also being very popular, the brass a little less so over the years. It seems like stainless steel is starting to take a little of that market share. So usually every metal covered here for almost every application other than some of those exotic ones. But I think this should cover the bases for you. Now we have our patented delay there. So like Chris had mentioned, crimp specifications for all sizes. Again, such a big deal here when creating a hose assembly. You know, obviously we've partnered with Continental on these couplings for a long time now, and one of the reasons is because they have high performance hoses. I mean, why would you put, you know, the Cadillac or in Chris's words, the cat's meow of Cam and Groove on a substandard hose? You know, wouldn't that be foolish? And I think a lot of people kind of miss the boat on that. You know, it's like, well, I'm going to go with a high-end hose and the cheapest coupling I can find. And it's like, well, they all work in tandem. So, you know, you got to find the weakest link and address that, right? So, you know, obviously, you know, for high performance hoses, but also for your everyday hoses. I mean, your customers don't want a hose that's going to leak or a fitting, a coupling that's going to leak as well. So they expect that repeatability, and that's what we're providing you here with. So also a lot of parts that we didn't really talk about here, but a couple more photos coming, jump sizes and spare parts. Some of those spare parts when we're talking about the handles, the stainless steel handles come in 316. The ring itself is actually a 600 grade of stainless steel because it needs those hardness properties for the spring. We also have the chemical compatibility available to check to make sure that some of your applications is lining up with the correct metal. But if you're ever not sure, just give us or Continental a ring on that one. Obviously, if you choose the wrong metal or the wrong gasket for the wrong application, it's going to be a problem. I think that's one of the things, you know, and Chris was talking about the decompression of the gaskets or failing. Sometimes you just have the wrong material in there. You know, standard is the bunanitrile that come with most of the couplings, but also available in Viton, Teflon encapsulated, Calres, Chemres, and a variety of others. Just a little bit of a photo here for the basic 8. I'm sure most of you are familiar with. You know, the 2 hose ends of the C and the E. The male and female threads, again, just standard stuff. You can use these with ferrules and sleeves. I mentioned before, obviously it's dependent upon the stamped information on what's the best fit for you. Honestly, the shank design was created and decided upon between Campbell and Goodyear at the time to be that hybrid that could be banded or crimped. And that's why you have those two higher bumps on there. Those two higher bumps actually also provide a little bit more holding power for some of those tougher hoses, like the chemical transfer ones that have those, plastic hard tubes in there. And as you know, sometimes they're pretty slick. So retaining into the hose, and make sure that performance is consistent is critical there. So we do have all the bases covered on the basic 8. Again, some of the jump sizes available in the aluminum and the stainless steel, spool adapters. We actually threw on the picture of the double D there. That's one of the designs we have, but we actually upgraded that design, which unfortunately we don't have a photo for. But if you can just kind of envision a shorter body there in the middle, and in order to achieve that, we actually had to offset the handles. So one side of the handles would be at a 90-degree angle compared to the other ones to allow that shank in the middle there to be greatly reduced. And when you're reducing the shank length specifically on a stainless steel product, you're taking out more metal and you're taking out a lot of cost. So that was a nice upgrade. Chris had mentioned the dust plug there a moment ago as well. All these parts are designed to meet the mil spec, which basically means that all cam and groove couplings from 1/2 inch all the way to 6 inch must mate to one another. And I think that most manufacturers' products do that. So it's not like you have to have an Insta-Lock connecting to an Insta-Lock. However, you will get the best performance that way. But this dust plug is really a kind of another one of those ingenious ideas that, once you see it, you're like, oh my God, that's so simple. I can't believe I never thought of that. Luckily, we had an engineer about 25 years ago who did. And really, it's just inverting it. So the closed off portion there on the right is the portion that goes into the hose and just makes it so much more easy to keep contaminants out of the hose. You can just wipe that off with a rag, as opposed to the hollow end on the other side, which is the design of every other dust plug out there, where you have to kind of like scoop out any contaminants, whether that be dirt, debris, or whatever is in the hose. You obviously want to make sure that's a clean entry into the system there. So what did we learn? Just a small delay on that one there. That's what happens when Chris is, just a few miles away doing that for me. Anyway, just as a bit of a wrap up here, and we'll take any questions that you might have. A proven hose system, over 2 decades of, in the field, performance, happy customers, repeat customers. I've really, I would stretch to find anyone that was not pleased and really blown away by this design. And one of the things I really have to impress upon you is, I understand that price is a major part of every discussion you have with your customers. Once in a while, you will find a customer and say, I don't care what it costs. Now, usually they say that after they have an accident and they're willing to pay anything to have some better performance and a better solution to what they just had fail in the field. However, I think sometimes as salespeople, we might fall back and say, you know what, I know my customer, they're not going to pay for that. Well, I tell you what, your customer will never buy the Insta-Lock if you never bring it to their attention. And even worse, what happens when your competition brings them this design and they say to you, well, hey, you've been my salesperson, for industrial hose and couplings for 10 years, and you had access to this and you didn't bring it to me? So, do yourself a favor, show the technology, let them make the decision whether they're willing to pay the extra few dollars for this type of coupling, which, as we've already shown, will perform under pressure, hopefully will, handle any of those out of control applications, like Chris said, where we're using a hose, that's not designed for a specific application. Or let's be honest, things go wrong in the field all the time. Systems get closed, pressure builds up, hose burst, or sometimes fittings eject, or maybe even blow apart themselves as well. So you want to give them the opportunity to really have that option and show them the technology. Even if you think never in a million years they'll pay for it, just bringing new technologies to them shows that you're on the cutting edge and you're partnering with manufacturers that are bringing innovative solutions to the marketplace. Really cool design. I think a lot of people get excited and really just want to hear about it. I mean, just looking at it, it's a far different design than what's been out there for so long. So you're helping your customers differentiate out there, and we're trying to help you differentiate from your competitors as well. Lots of unique safety and performance features. And as we know, Cam and Groove is a majorly saturated market all over the world. And you know what? I bet you most of you would have a hard time kind of differentiating or seeing the difference and naming the competitors of the different Cam and Grooves out there, because so many of them look the same. This one will obviously be quite a different look out there, and quite a different performance for your customers too.
All right, well, I think that's it. So if there are questions, in your box on the right-hand side of the screen, there is an area for you to type questions. So if anybody has any questions on the product, and just remember that, you can talk to your Campbell Fittings or Industrial Tridon Group salesman. They have all the information needed in terms of availability of various sizes, jump sizes, etc. And we'll be sending you the Insta-Lock differentiator PDF along with a copy of the presentation in PDF form. So if you have any questions, obviously, certainly my name will be on the email you get, and you feel free to call me or contact me via email with any additional questions. I can direct you to your particular salesman. So I think I don't see any questions. Courtney, do we see any?
Well, there was a couple of comments on here that a few of the viewers had mentioned. One of them that I find kind of comical was that the Civicon Auto Lock is the worst. I think that was a fairly popular design for a while, where you pull down on the ring to actually unlock the arm itself. I think that has some inherent issues with it. So I could see why not everyone is in love with that design. Also something that's been around quite a while, probably 3 decades, if I'm not mistaken. Another comment was OSHA loves residual spillage. I would have to agree with that. No one likes any type of coupling, fitting, or hose that's leaking. So again, the proven performance is your key to staying away from that. Here is one question that was a little interesting. Is there a crimp solution with Insta-Lock for hot tar and asphalt? So that actually is not an easy answer. We have done some testing. I know Continental has as well, with hot tar and asphalt and the Insta-Lock. It does have some good performance. I don't believe that from the Campbell perspective that we carte blanche just say, sure, you can use it for that. The problem is, and obviously you all know this, that the very elevated temperatures and the nature of hot tar and asphalt are just difficult for a Cam and Groove to handle. A lot of times the hoses are, I think, about 350 degrees Fahrenheit. I think the big unknown is what pressure is involved with some of those applications. And that's something that you always just have to dig into as a distributor selling to your end user, is what is truly the application. And then, like Chris had mentioned before during our test, why would you use a hose that was rated so much higher than the coupling, or vice versa? For that test, we were looking to really push the limits of the coupling. But, out in the field, I continually hear things like, well, just because the hose is rated to that doesn't mean the application is that. You know, and you do have to be careful. I mean, when you're supplying a hose or a fitting and a hose assembly that's actually not rated, you know, for what the application calls for, that's really a dangerous combination and really a recipe for disaster. So be very, very careful. Again, specifically with the hot tar and asphalt, I think that the PSI is usually pretty low. But then you have other issues like the gasket. You know, can the standard gasket handle those? And usually they cannot. So I would prefer to not answer that directly and say, you know what, I would take that on a case-by-case basis. But as a general rule of thumb, I would say that it's probably best not to use a cam and groove for those applications. You know, typically at Campbell, we recommend an IMS, which was a interlocking male stem, part of the ground joint family. With a bolt clamp, because you have a lot of thermal cycling, so you have a lot of expansion and contraction of the hose during and after the application, and really you need to be retightening those bolts after those applications. So be very careful, and again, realize that cam and groove is not okay for every application that's out there. You are the experts in the field, and I know we have a couple of end users on the line, and I appreciate you attending. But you know, as distributor salespeople and people that are providing answers to the end user world, be careful. You definitely want to make sure you're recommending the right hose, the right fitting for each application. And again, a lot of times I think people are like, well, cam and groove's easy, it's put together, it mates with everything, which sounds like it's a good idea, but a lot of times it might not be. And just one more piece of information, food for thought. You know, just because cam and groove hooks up everything might not be a good idea. You might need that line differentiation too. So to bring it back to Insta-Lock here, I think far and away the really most revolutionary and high performance cam and groove on the market today. Certainly that wow factor. And you know, now at a price point that can keep you competitive with those other domestic options that are in the marketplace today, really you're getting a lot of bang for your buck. So Chris, thank you so much for doing the heavy lifting today. Appreciate all that. I did my best to stay a statue and not move during the presentation. I had to take
no problem.
Water. I had to take a couple of drinks of water just because I was getting parched watching you. But you know, again, like Chris said, don't hesitate to reach out. We're here for you, and good luck, happy selling, and have a great fall, everyone.
Thanks for attending. See ya.